I literally could not choose a favorite book of all time if there was a gun to my head and somebody told me to. I hope that situation never arises, because I'll be in big trouble. Hi besties, welcome. Today I hope your day feels like the first sip of coffee in the morning. I had a couple people ask for a video about all my favorite books of all time. That's what I'm doing today. I want to say these are in no particular order. I do not have a favorite book of all time. I have books from almost every kind of section of my life to talk about today. First up, The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. This book is a fictionalization of the true relationship between Patroclus and Achilles in ancient Greece during the Trojan War era. So it feeds the part of my soul that was a huge Greek myth nerd in middle school. Shout out Percy Jackson. Even if you're unfamiliar with Greek myth, Madeline Miller does such a good job of giving you just enough backstory for each of the characters and just enough explanation for you to understand what's going on without it feeling lectury. She weaves it into the plot so well, and I never felt confused, even though it's been a long minute since I dove into the world of Greek myth. Patroclus is sort of like a servant. He works for Achilles' father, and he's the same age as Achilles, and they end up striking up a friendship and then falling in love. And so it follows their life throughout their childhood and then teenage years and then into young adulthood. It is painful, it hurts like a motherfucker, and it doesn't let up. Madeline Miller's writing is so lyrical. I know that this book is incredibly hyped right now, but I genuinely think it's worth every bit of hype that it's getting. Next up, a book I have loaned out, Normal People by Sally Rooney. This is gonna come as no surprise to anyone who's watched even a single one of my videos on this channel. Normal People is about Marianne and Connell, who have known each other pretty much their whole lives because they've gone to school together. It opens with the two of them in high school together. Connell and Marianne end up falling for each other, and it follows their kind of twisting relationship throughout high school and then into college. This book just exemplifies so well how much other people can affect you and change you. Sally Rooney writes with a great attention to the kind of natural anxiety and weight of growing up in the world as it is right now. There is a level of fear and anxiety and responsibility that comes with growing up in a world that is grappling with a devastating climate crisis, racial inequality, rampant sexual assaults, a growing class divide, a literal viral pandemic. Sally Rooney's characters feel very acutely aware of that. Even when that's not the main thing on their mind, there's kind of an undercurrent of that anxiety, and her characters talk a lot and have a lot of conversations about the class divide especially, but they also reference, you know, climate change. Anyway, I need to chill about Normal People because that is just gonna become my brand. Next up, I have my favorite YA book of all time, hands down without a doubt, is I'll Give You the Sun by Jandy Nelson. I'll Give You the Sun follows twins Noah and Jude, but it follows them in two different timelines. So it switches perspectives between Noah and Jude. So when the book is in Noah's perspective, it's 3 years earlier than the chapters in Jude's perspective. So you sort of piece together the events and plot of the book as you go, and that makes it incredibly compelling to read. I didn't want to put it down when I read it. This book, like Song of Achilles, is very lyrical. The prose is beautiful. I would tag lines nonstop while I was reading this. The first time I ever read it, I was experiencing something very similar to the main characters. This book came into my life at the perfect time and really just healed up a lot of the wounds that I felt really prominently at the time. I don't think you have to be a young adult to love this book. I think I will be recommending this book for the rest of my life. Next, The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt. I am without Dust Jacket. I don't know where it went. The main character in this book is named Theo, and it opens with a scene in which he and his mother are in an art museum when he is a young boy. A bomb goes off in the art museum and his mother dies. That's not a spoiler, it happens in the first chapter. This book follows the rest of Theo's life into his adulthood. He meets a lot of interesting people along the way. It twists and it turns and it goes in a million different directions. I was enamored with this book the entire time I read it. I think it's just so astoundingly written, the way all of the different plot lines weave together, the way it's character study, but also with a really compelling plot. It grapples with trauma, loneliness, love. I know that people on BookTube talk about The Secret History by Donna Tartt all the time, but I think more people should talk about The Goldfinch. This book is just a feat. The fact that somebody wrote this baffles me. Anyway, I stan The Goldfinch. Please read it and talk to me about it. It's worth every second of the long journey that it will be. The movie was horrible though. Next, I have a couple classics. I have Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. This copy is cloth bound and it belonged to my grandmother and then my mother and now me. So it's very special to me. It has illustrations. This book, if you don't know, is set in Massachusetts during the Civil War, and it follows the March family, specifically the 4 March sisters, who are all artistically inclined. Jo is a writer and also our main character. This book was revolutionary in so many ways. It shows women with artistic pursuits and dreams of labor beyond the home, but it also hits on the fact that some women want to be stay-at-home mothers and that that's fine too. Louisa May Alcott said in interviews that sometimes she wished she had been born into a man's body. She also said things about how she was kind of uninterested in men and liked women a lot more. She was definitely queer. This is semi-autobiographical and Jo is the character who's supposed to represent Louisa May Alcott. This book feels like drinking tea on a rainy day wrapped up in a blanket. Laurie and Jo are 2 of my favorite literary characters of all time. I love them so much, would die for them. It's easy to read, it's not super challenging in terms of the prose and the language. This was a huge book for me growing up because it showed women as complex and interesting and having relationships to each other that were just as complex and interesting and important as their relationships to men. Next up, I have Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. Pride and Prejudice follows Lizzie Bennet. Her mother is desperate to marry off all of her daughters and to marry them off to men who are well-to-do and have more money than they do. Enter Mr. Darcy. He and Lizzie meet and they hate each other. This is the classic enemies to lovers trope, but it's so nuanced and interesting and good. Jane Austen's satire about the class divide and about society of the 1400s. I'm willing to bet a lot of money. It was like the 1480s or something like that when this was published. Oh no, oh no, oh no, 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 no. But the satire of the society back then is so funny, but it also hits you right in the gut. I think there's a reason this is one of the most well-known classics. I think it's brilliant. My favorite adaptation of this book is a tie between the 2005 movie with Keira Knightley and the Lizzie Bennet Diaries on YouTube, which is a web series that modernizes this story, and it was produced by Hank Green, and I remember watching it every week when it came out. I love it so much. I think it's a brilliant retelling of Pride and Prejudice. So if you haven't watched Lizzie Bennet Diaries, go watch them, become obsessed. Next, I have my favorite nonfiction that I've ever read, which is Just Mercy by Bryan Stevenson. This book is about the prison system in America, the inequalities within the prison system. Bryan Stevenson, if you don't know, is the founder of the Equal Justice Initiative, which is a project that works to keep wrongfully convicted prisoners from being executed, from having prison sentences, etc. And also trying to make sure that Black people in America have an equal justice system, which they don't. Bryan Stevenson went to Harvard Law and then moved to Alabama to fight for prisoners in the rural South who were being executed at a higher rate. It reads so easily. It doesn't feel like you're kind of being beaten over the head with statistics, even though there's plenty of statistics in here. It gives you a really good feel for how unjust the prison system is, especially in the South, especially in rural areas. But it's told from Bryan Stevenson's perspective, so it gives you a lot of his emotional journey through all of these different cases. It follows a few cases that he worked on specifically, so you also have sort of a plot line and a through line of some of these incarcerated men. I think this should be required reading in America. I really do. I think that in high school everyone should have to read this book. It opened my eyes in so many ways, and I thought I was already pretty aware of what was wrong with the prison system, but I had no idea to what extent. So definitely recommend. Diving back into YA for just a moment, I have to shout out The Dream Thieves by Maggie Stiefvater. This is the second book in the Raven cycle. So the first book is The Raven Boys, and I love the first book also, but The Dream Thieves is my favorite in the series. I love The Raven Boys so much. I tell everyone to read this series. It's the only series that I've really fallen in love with since Harry Potter and Percy Jackson. I do not tend to reach for fantasy or magical realism as much. That being said, oh my god, I'm in love with the series. I love all of the characters so much. If you don't know, the Raven cycle follows these 4 boys, Gansey, Adam, Noah, and Ronan, who go to this all-boys academy in Henrietta, Virginia, and they happen to meet Blue Sargent, who is the daughter of psychics. But Gansey is on the hunt to find the tomb of Glendower, who is a dead Scottish king, and he believes is lying on a ley line in Henrietta, Virginia. So it's part treasure hunt, part found family, part asshole kids. Gosh, it's so quick. I could not put it down. I will always love the Raven cycle. Next, my favorite play of all time, and that is The Glass Menagerie by Tennessee Williams. This is a classic, and rightfully so. This play is about the Wingfield family, Amanda, Tom, and Laura to be specific, and Amanda is the matriarch of the family, a little cuckoo, based off of Tennessee Williams' own mother. Tom is the Tennessee Williams figure. This is semi-autobiographical. Tom is the Tennessee Williams figure, the sort of disillusioned older sibling who wants more than what he has been able to achieve thus far in his life. Laura is the youngest sibling. She walks with a limp and wears a brace. She's very self-conscious about that and has a really hard time overcoming her own insecurities to go into the world. Amanda is trying to marry Laura off to a gentleman caller. I think Tennessee Williams' writing is beautiful. He captures Southern familial relationships so beautifully. He's a classic American playwright for a reason, and his life was so challenging and difficult, and he put so much of it into his plays. So it feels so real because it was so real. Next, in terms of Shakespeare, some of my favorites are Much Ado About Nothing, Hamlet, Macbeth, King Lear, Romeo and Juliet. That's what I'll go with for now. I love pretty much everything Shakespeare's written, so I'm not gonna tell you what they're about because there's like 6 of them. Anyway, moving on from theater, because I could go on for forever about theater. Perks of Being a Wallflower by Stephen Chbosky. This one's difficult because I actually like the movie a lot more than the book, which is crazy because I love the book an insane amount. But this story means so much to me that I have to include this. So much of what Charlie was thinking and going through in this book really resonated with me, and it was things that I was always so scared of in my own head, and I finally had a character that proved that I was not the only person who felt these things. And for so long I really thought I was the only person in the world who thought the way that I thought, and then Charlie proved to me that I wasn't, and so this book is very important to me because of that, so I have to shout it out. Okay, a few of my favorite books from childhood that I have to shout out are Each Little Bird That Sings by Deborah Wiles. My sister actually got this signed for Sally. Beautiful bird, sing. This book follows Comfort Snowberger, whose family owns a funeral home. And so she's very intimately familiar with death. So Comfort is pretty sure she knows how to cope with death. And then somebody very close to her in her family dies, and she's kind of thrown into the thick of it personally for kind of the first time and has to grapple with her relationships to the rest of her family and just dealing with death of somebody who she loves so much. Ooh, bookmark. And I definitely recommend it. Even if you're not a kid, I think it's still just as enjoyable. It's very funny, but very sweet. Next I have Because of Winn-Dixie by Kate DiCamillo, and also every other book Kate DiCamillo has ever written. She was my favorite author growing up, and I have almost all of her books on my shelf over there, but this was my first Kate DiCamillo and probably my favorite, so I decided to include this one. This book follows India Opal Bologna, who is at the Winn-Dixie superstore one day, and a stray dog is running through the store and smiles at Opal, and so she decides to take him home and name him Winn-Dixie. And it follows her and Winn-Dixie as they go through her whole town and kind of meet all of the characters in her little small town. You can see that I wrote my name in this book when I was like 6, because that is some handwriting. She's brilliant, her books are brilliant, they defined my childhood, and honestly they define my adulthood too, because I reread them all the time. Next I have to shout out, this specifically is Ramona's World, which I remember being my favorite growing up, and you can kind of see that it's a little bit beat up. I still to this day on my shelf have all of the Ramona books by Beverly Cleary. I remember exactly where on the shelf at my local library the Beverly Cleary books were when I was a kid. I think they've reorganized now, but I would beeline to the Beverly Cleary section every time I went to the library, and I slowly acquired all of them for myself. And if I ever have children one day, I can't wait to read these with them. Ramona is a troublesome young woman. She is stubborn and she is annoying and she is a pest. And the series touches on having an annoying older sister, which I know everything about. I just felt that Ramona was incredibly relatable when I was young because I was stubborn and annoying and a pest. I live and die by Ramona and Beezus. Last but by no means least, if I'm talking about my favorite books, I have to talk about The Little Prince by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. So sorry if I have any French viewers for butchering the hell out of that name. I can't put into words how much I love this book. Every time I read it, I learn more because it's so layered that I think it's also written with adults in mind. And this book follows a little prince who goes to space and ends up going to all of these different planets and meeting the people and animals and things. The back has one line that says, "The pilot realizes that when life's events are too difficult to understand, there is no choice but to succumb to their mysteries," which is sort of the thesis statement of this book. Never let the child we all have within ourselves die. This book is just so wonderful. It's so magical. You can read it in an afternoon. It's got the most beautiful illustrations. I don't even know what else to say about it, but it makes me think about life differently every time I read it. And sometimes when I'm feeling really cynical or disillusioned with the world around me, I just have to open this and read a little bit of it to remember that being here on this planet is not as pointless as it sometimes seems. Wow, what a gift. Those are all my favorite books besides Harry Potter, but we don't need to talk about that. I genuinely and truly believe that had I not read every single one of these books, I would be a very different person. They have all shaped me so much. Please tell me down below what your favorite book or books of all time are, because I'm thinking that I kind of want to do a video reading my subscribers' favorite books of all time. So drop those down below. If you want to hear me talk about books more, subscribe, turn on bell notifications, all that good stuff. In case you haven't heard it today, I love you. Bye.